My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 75 years old, and I've lived in this house for 43 years. The same house where I raised my children, where my husband died, and where I thought I'd spend my final years in peace. But 3 weeks ago, my son Michael and his wife Jennifer moved in with their 2 teenagers, claiming they needed to save money for a bigger house. What started as temporary help became a hostile takeover of my own home. Last night, they told me I needed to move to the basement because the kids needed separate rooms and Jennifer needed a home office. When I protested that the basement was cold, damp, and had no proper bedroom, Michael said, "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just temporary, and honestly, you spend most of your time downstairs anyway." This morning, I woke up on a fold-out cot in my own basement listening to my family moving around upstairs in the house I've owned for 40 decades. That's when I made a phone call that would change everything. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own home, stay with me. Let me tell you how I got here. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I'm 75 years old. I've been a widow for 8 years since my husband, Frank, passed away from a heart attack. We bought this 4-bedroom colonial house in 1981 when Michael was just 5 years old and his sister Sarah was 3. Frank and I worked hard to pay off the mortgage early. He was an electrician and I was a bookkeeper for a local accounting firm. We lived modestly, saved diligently, and by the time Frank retired, we owned our home free and clear. It was our pride and joy, our security, our legacy for our children. After Frank died, I continued living in the house alone. It was too big for just me, but it held 40 years of memories. Every room told a story. Michael's first steps in the living room, Sarah's high school graduation party in the backyard, Christmas mornings around the tree in the front window. My children had both moved away for their careers. Sarah lived in California with her husband and 2 young children, visiting twice a year. Michael lived about an hour away with his wife Jennifer and their twins, Emma and Jake, now 15 and 14. For the first few years after Frank's death, our family relationships were normal and loving. Michael and his family visited regularly, Sarah called weekly, and I felt connected to my children and grandchildren despite living alone. The problem started about 2 years ago when Michael's construction business began struggling. The economy had hit the building industry hard, and his company was barely breaking even. Jennifer worked part-time as a dental hygienist, but her income wasn't enough to maintain their lifestyle. They had bought a large house in an expensive neighborhood when business was good, and now they were struggling with the mortgage payments, property taxes, and the cost of raising 2 teenagers. Michael started asking for small loans, $500 here, $1,000 there, always promising to pay me back when business improved. I was happy to help. Frank and I had been careful with money, and I had a comfortable nest egg from his life insurance and our retirement savings. Helping my son during a difficult time felt like the right thing to do. But the requests became more frequent and larger. A $5,000 loan to cover property taxes, $3,000 for Emma's braces, $2,500 for Jake's hockey equipment and league fees. Each time, Michael assured me it was temporary, that business would pick up soon, that he would pay me back with interest. I never saw any of that money again. The requests escalated when Jennifer lost her part-time job 6 months ago. The dental office where she worked had to cut staff, and suddenly their household income was reduced to whatever Michael could bring in from his struggling construction business. "Mom, we're really in trouble," Michael told me during a family dinner at my house. "We're behind on the mortgage again, and we're facing foreclosure. If we could just get caught up, I can turn the business around." "How much do you need?" I asked, my heart breaking for their situation. $15,000, he said quietly. "I know it's a lot, but if we can just get caught up, I can turn the business around." $15,000 was a significant portion of my savings, but the thought of my son's family losing their home was unbearable. I agreed to help, liquidating one of my CDs to give them the money. That was 4 months ago, and their financial situation hadn't improved. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Michael's business was failing, and instead of looking for steady employment, he seemed to be waiting for a miracle that would restore his company to profitability. 3 weeks ago, he called me with a new request that caught me completely off guard. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll understand. His and Jennifer have been talking, and we think it might be best if we moved in with you for a while. Moved in with me? I repeated, surprised by the suggestion. Just temporarily, he assured me, until we can get back on our financial feet. We're behind on the mortgage again, and we're facing foreclosure. If we could live with you for 6 months or so, we could save money and figure out our next steps. I was hesitant. My house was my sanctuary, my private space where I had learned to live independently after Frank's death. The thought of sharing it with 4 other people, especially 2 teenagers, was overwhelming. But Michael was my son, and his family was in crisis. How could I say no? Of course, I said. Family helps family. You can stay as long as you need. I thought I was offering temporary shelter to my struggling son and his family. I had no idea I was inviting an invasion that would result in me being exiled to my own basement. The first week was manageable. Michael and Jennifer took the guest room and the twins shared the den, sleeping on air mattresses. It was crowded and chaotic, but everyone was polite and grateful for my help. But by the second week, the dynamics began to shift. Jennifer started rearranging my kitchen, claiming she needed more space to cook for the family. Michael began using my home office for his business calls, moving my papers and personal items to make room for his files. The twins took over the living room with their video games, homework, and teenage drama. My quiet, orderly home became a noisy, cluttered space where I felt like an intruder rather than the owner. When I tried to address these issues, I was met with defensive responses and guilt trips. Mom, we're all stressed about our situation, Michael said when I complained about the noise and mess. Can't you be a little more understanding? We're doing our best to respect your space, Jennifer added, but we have needs too, and this is a difficult adjustment for everyone. The breaking point came last week when Jennifer announced that she needed a dedicated home office space to start a freelance bookkeeping business. I think the best solution would be for you to move to the basement, she told me factually. That way I can use your bedroom as an office, the twins can each have their own room, and everyone will be more comfortable. I was stunned. You want me to move to the basement of my own house? It's just temporary, Michael said, supporting his wife's suggestion. And honestly, Mom, you spend most of your time downstairs anyway. It makes sense for you to sleep down there too. The basement isn't a bedroom. It's cold, damp, and there's no proper bed. We'll get you a nice fold-out cot, Jennifer said dismissively. It'll be like camping. You always said you liked camping with Frank. The comparison to camping with Frank was particularly hurtful. Those had been happy times when we chose to sleep outdoors under the stars, not times when I was banished to the basement of my own home. But I agreed, not wanting to cause family conflict. I told myself it was temporary, that they would get back on their feet soon and move out. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of sleeping on an uncomfortable cot in my own cold, damp basement while my family lived comfortably upstairs in the house I had owned for 40 years. That's when I lay on that cot listening to my family moving around upstairs and realized that nothing about this situation was temporary. They had no intention of leaving, no plan for getting back on their feet, and no respect for my comfort or dignity. That's when I picked up my phone and made a call that would change everything. The call I made that morning was to Janet Morrison, a real estate agent I'd known for 20 years. Janet had helped Frank and I buy the house in 1981, and she had become a family friend over the decades. "Margaret, how wonderful to hear from you," Janet said when she answered the phone. "How are you doing?" "I'm ready to sell the house," I said without preamble. "Sell the house? Your house? Margaret, that's a big decision. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "How quickly can we get it on the market?" "Well, we'd need to do a market analysis, stage the house, take photos, Probably 2 to 3 weeks if we move quickly. But Margaret, can I ask what's prompting this decision? I explained the situation, how Michael's family had moved in, how I'd been relegated to the basement, and how my own home had become a place where I felt unwelcome and uncomfortable. Oh my goodness, Margaret, I am so sorry. That's completely unacceptable. But are you sure selling is the answer? Maybe you could just ask them to leave. They have nowhere to go. And honestly, I don't think they'd leave voluntarily. They've made themselves very comfortable in my house. Where will you go if you sell? I'll figure that out. Right now, I just need to know that I have options. Janet agreed to come over that afternoon to assess the house and discuss the selling process. I spent the morning in the basement planning how to handle the conversation with my family. When Janet arrived at 2 p.m., I met her at the front door and immediately took her down to the basement to show her my current living situation. "This is where you're sleeping?" she asked, looking at the fold-out cot, the small space heater I'd brought down to combat the cold, and the makeshift area where I kept my clothes in plastic storage bins. "This is where they've put me," I confirmed. Janet was clearly appalled. "Margaret, this is elder abuse. You know that, right? This is your house, and they've essentially made you homeless in your own home." I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but she was right. I was being abused by my own family, manipulated and displaced in the home I had worked decades to own. We spent an hour going through the house while Michael was out on a job and Jennifer was at a doctor's appointment with the twins. Janet took notes and photos, assessed the condition of each room, and discussed what would need to be done to prepare for sale. "The good news is that it's a seller's market right now," she explained. "Houses in this neighborhood are selling quickly, often above asking price. With some minor staging and repairs, we could probably list this for around $485,000. $485,000. It was more than Frank and I had ever imagined the house would be worth when we bought it for $78,000 in 1981. "How quickly could we close once we have a buyer?" I asked. "With a cash buyer, as little as 2 weeks. With financing, probably 4 to 6 weeks. Let's do it. I want to list it as soon as possible." Janet was concerned. "Margaret, I have to ask, have you discussed this with Michael? I mean, I understand you're upset about the living situation, but selling the family home is a major decision that will affect everyone." "Michael made his decision when he moved me to the basement. Now I'm making mine." We agreed that Janet would return the next day with a photographer and a staging consultant. The house would be listed by the end of the week. That evening, I sat in the basement while my family ate dinner upstairs. I could hear their conversation and laughter, the sounds of a family enjoying their comfortable life in my house, while I was banished to the cold, damp basement. I thought about the past 43 years in this house, the memories Frank and I had created, the children we had raised together, and the life we had built together. It was painful to think about leaving, but it was more painful to stay in a place where I was treated like an unwelcome burden. The next morning, Janet arrived with her team. The photographer took dozens of pictures of every room, capturing the house's best features and potential. The staging consultant made suggestions for minor improvements that would help the house show better. Michael was at work, but Jennifer was home and clearly confused by the activity. "What's going on?" she asked when she saw strangers in the house with cameras and clipboards. "I'm selling the house," I told her calmly. "Selling the house?" she repeated, as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What do you mean, selling the house?" "I mean, I'm putting it on the market," I explained. "Janet is my real estate agent, and we're preparing to list it." Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. "You can't sell the house. We live here." "You live here because I allowed it, and now I'm choosing not to allow it anymore." "But Where will we go? We don't have anywhere else to live. That's something you and Michael will need to figure out, just like I had to figure out how to live in my own basement. Jennifer called Michael immediately, and within an hour he was home, his face red with anger and panic. Mom, what is this about selling the house? Jennifer says there are real estate people here taking pictures. That's correct. I've decided to sell. You can't just sell the house without discussing it with us. We live here. You live here because I allowed it, and now I'm choosing not to allow it anymore. But we have nowhere to go. You know our financial situation. Your financial situation is not my responsibility, I said, feeling stronger and more confident than I had in months. I've helped you as much as I can, and in return, you've made me a stranger in my own home. The argument that followed was intense and painful. Michael accused me of being selfish and vindictive. Jennifer cried and pleaded, talking about the children's stability and their need for a home. But I had made my decision, and I wasn't backing down. You have 30 days to find other arrangements, I told them. That's more notice than most landlords give. 30 days? Michael must not understand time. Mom, that's not enough time to find a place and save money for deposits. You've had 3 weeks to look for jobs and make plans. You chose to get comfortable in my house. That night, I slept in the basement for what I hoped would be the last time. Upstairs, I could hear Michael and Jennifer having heated discussions about their options, their voices carrying through the thin basement ceiling. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family relationships that had been damaged, but relief that I was finally taking control of my own life and home. The house was officially listed 3 days later. Janet had been right about the market. We had 5 showings in the first weekend and 3 offers by Monday morning. The highest offer was $492,000, all cash, with a closing date just 3 weeks away. I accepted it immediately. When I told Michael and Jennifer about the accepted offer, the reality of the situation finally hit them. They had less than 3 weeks to find somewhere else to live, and they were completely unprepared. Mom, please, Michael begged, can't we work something out? Maybe we could pay you rents or help with household expenses. Where was that offer 3 weeks ago when you moved me to the basement? I asked. We were just trying to make the best of a difficult situation, Jennifer said. So am I. And my best solution is to sell the house and start fresh somewhere else. The woman who had been sleeping in her own basement was about to become the woman who sold her house out from under the family that had displaced her. The 3 weeks between accepting the offer and closing day were the most tense and difficult of my 75 years. Michael and Jennifer alternated between desperate pleading and angry accusations, while I remained firm in my decision to sell the house and move on with my life. Mom, you're destroying our family, Michael said during one of our many confrontations. The kids are devastated. They don't understand why their grandmother's kicking them out. I'm not kicking anyone out, I replied calmly. I'm selling my house. There's a difference. Where are we supposed to go? We don't have money for deposits or first month's rent. You should have thought about that before you moved me to the basement. The guilt trips were relentless. Jennifer would cry and talk about how the children were suffering, how this would traumatize them, and how I was being cruel and heartless. Michael would remind me of all the times he had helped me over the years, conveniently forgetting that most of that help had involved me giving him money. But I had made my decision, and I wasn't backing down. The house was sold, the closing was scheduled, and I was moving forward with my plans. I spent those 3 weeks making my own arrangements. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in a senior living community about 20 minutes away. It had modern amenities, social activities, and a sense of security that I hadn't felt in months. Most importantly, it was mine alone. No one could move me to the basement, rearrange my belongings, or make me feel unwelcome in my own home. The financial aspect of the sale was liberating. After paying off the small remaining balance on my mortgage and covering the costs of the sale, I netted over $470,000. Combined with my existing savings, I was financially secure for the rest of my life. I used some of the money to furnish my new apartment exactly as I wanted it. I bought new furniture that fit the space perfectly, decorated with colors and styles that reflected my personal taste, and created a home that was entirely my own. The rest of the money went into investments that would provide income and security for my remaining years. For the first time since Frank's death, I felt financially independent and secure. The decision to let go of the house had been painful, but it had also been necessary. I had learned that sometimes you have to lose something important to gain something even more valuable: your dignity, your autonomy, and your self-respect. 3 months after the sale, I received a Christmas card from Michael's family. It was a generic card with a brief note saying they hoped I was well and that they missed me. I didn't respond. The time for superficial gestures and empty sentiments had passed. If they wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be based on genuine respect and appreciation, not on guilt or obligation. The woman who had been sleeping in her own basement was now sleeping peacefully in her own bed, in her own apartment, living her own life on her own terms. 2 years after selling the house and moving to Sunset Manor, I was standing at the podium in the community center, addressing a room full of elderly residents and their adult children at our first annual Healthy Family Boundaries workshop. What had started as a small support group had grown into a community-wide program that was helping families navigate the complex dynamics of aging and independence. How many of you have been told by your adult children that you're being stubborn or difficult when you try to maintain control over your own home and finances? I asked the audience. Nearly every elderly person in the room raised their hand. And how many adult children here have assumed that your aging parents should be grateful for any help you offer, regardless of how that help affects their dignity and autonomy? Several younger people in the audience looked uncomfortable, but didn't raise their hands. The workshop had been my idea, developed from the support group I had been leading for the past year. We had invited families to attend together, creating a safe space for honest conversations about expectations, boundaries, and mutual respect. The goal isn't to create conflict, I explained. It's to create understanding. Aging parents need to feel valued and respected, not just cared for. Adult children need to understand that help should enhance their parents' lives, not take them over. The response to the workshop had been overwhelming. We had a waiting list of families who wanted to attend, and I had been invited to present similar programs at other senior communities throughout the region. My personal transformation had been just as dramatic as my public advocacy work. The confidence I had gained from standing up to Michael and Jennifer had carried over into every aspect of my life. I had become the president of the Sunset Manor Residents Council, leading initiatives that improved life for all 200 residents. We had successfully advocated for better dining options, more social activities, and improved transportation services. I had also started dating Harold seriously. Our relationship had deepened over the past year into something that brought joy and companionship to both our lives. We were talking about moving in together, combining our apartments into one of the larger units available for couples. "You've taught me that it's possible to start over at any age," Harold told me as we walked through the community gardens he had helped design. "I thought my life was basically over after my children showed their true colors, but you've shown me that the best chapters might still be ahead." Harold's story was similar to mine. His adult children had pressured him to sell his house and give them the proceeds, claiming they needed help with their mortgages and children's education. When he refused, they had cut off contact with him, using his grandchildren as emotional weapons. I spent 6 months feeling sorry for myself, he admitted. But watching you rebuild your life after what Michael did to you inspired me to focus on my own happiness instead of their approval. Our relationship was everything my marriage to Frank had been, but with the wisdom and perspective that came from decades of life experience. We supported each other's independence while enjoying our partnership. The financial security from selling the house had also allowed me to be generous in ways that felt meaningful and appreciated. I had established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, donated to organizations that helped elderly people avoid financial abuse, and contributed to community programs that made a real difference. The contrast with my previous financial relationship with Michael's family was stark. Instead of funding entitlement and ingratitude, I was supporting people and causes that genuinely appreciated the help and used it to improve lives. I had also reconnected with Sarah, my daughter in California. She had been horrified when she learned about how Michael had treated me and had made efforts to strengthen our relationship despite the geographical distance. "Mom, I had no idea what was happening," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "I knew Michael was having financial problems, but I never imagined he would treat you that way." "I didn't want to burden you with family drama," I replied. "You're my mother. Your well-being is always my concern. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, even though it must have been incredibly difficult." Sarah had visited twice since I moved to Sunset Manor, and she was impressed by the life I had built for myself. "You seem happier than I've seen you since Dad died," she observed during her last visit. "This place suits you, and Harold is wonderful." "I'm living my own life for the first time in years," I explained. "I'm not trying to solve anyone else's problems or meet anyone else's expectations. It's liberating." The relationship with Michael and his family remained non-existent. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that they were still struggling financially, that Michael was working construction jobs for other people, and Jennifer was working full-time as a dental hygienist. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, but I also felt no obligation to help them. They had shown me who they were when they moved me to the basement of my own house, and I had responded by showing them who I was when I sold that house out from under them. The most meaningful recognition came when I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. My story had been featured in a magazine article about financial abuse by family members, and the conference organizers wanted me to share my experience with social workers, elder law attorneys, and healthcare professionals. "Mrs. Wilson represents the best possible outcome for elder abuse situations," the conference director told the audience. "She recognized what was happening, took action to protect herself, and has used her experience to help others avoid similar situations." The standing ovation I received wasn't just for my personal story. It was recognition of the movement I had helped create, the awareness I had raised about the prevalence of family financial abuse, and the hope I had given to other elderly people who were facing similar situations. After the conference, I was approached by dozens of professionals who wanted to implement similar programs in their communities. I had inadvertently become an expert on a topic I never wanted to know about. But my expertise was helping others avoid the pain and humiliation I had experienced. The book I was writing about my experience was nearly complete. From Basement to Boardroom, How I Reclaimed My Life After Family Betrayal would be published by a small press that specialized in books for seniors. But the pre-order suggested it would reach a much wider audience. "Your story gives people permission to put themselves first," my editor told me. "Too many elderly people think they have to accept whatever treatment their family dishes out. You're showing them that they have choices and power." As I looked back on the 2 years since selling the house, I was amazed by how much my life had changed. The woman who was sleeping in her own basement was now sleeping peacefully in her own bed, in her own apartment, with a man who respected and cherished her. The grandmother who was treated like an unwelcome burden was now a respected advocate whose work was helping families across the country develop healthier relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to start over, never too late to demand respect, and never too late to create a life that honored your own worth and dignity. The new beginning I had created was more fulfilling than anything I had lost, and I was excited about whatever came next.
3 years after selling the house, I was shopping for groceries at the supermarket near Sunset Manor when I encountered Jennifer in the produce section. It was the first time I had seen any member of Michael's family since the day they moved out, and the meeting was as awkward as I had expected it would be. "Margaret," she said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "How are you?" "I'm very well, thank you," I replied, continuing to select apples while maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. She looked older, more worn than I remembered. Her clothes were clean, but clearly inexpensive, and she had the tired appearance of someone who was working hard and struggling financially. "You look different," she observed. "Healthier. Happier." I was different. The past 3 years had been transformative in ways that were probably visible to anyone who had known me during my period of family servitude. I was more confident, more at peace with myself, and no longer carried the constant stress of trying to meet other people's expectations while sacrificing my own needs. "I am happier," I confirmed. "I've been keeping busy with volunteer work and community activities." "I heard you moved to a senior community," she said. "How do you like it?" "I love it," I said honestly. "It's exactly what I needed." We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, both of us aware that there were significant unresolved issues between us, but neither sure how to address them in a grocery store encounter. "Margaret," she said, finally, "I've been wanting to talk to you about what happened, about how we treated you. I know it was wrong." "What's brought this on?" I asked curiously, curious about her motivation for wanting to have this conversation now. "Honestly, my mother moved in with us 6 months ago after she broke her hip. And experiencing what it's like to have an elderly family member in our small apartment has made me realize how terrible we were to you." I waited for her to continue, not offering reassurance or absolution. "She's not easy to live with," Jennifer continued. "She's critical, demanding, and seems to expect us to cater to her every need. And I keep thinking about how patient and helpful you always were, and how we repaid that kindness by moving you to the basement." "I see," I said neutrally. "And I also want you to know that we've been struggling since you sold the house," she admitted. "We're living in a 2-bedroom apartment, the kids are sharing a room, and money is tight. It's been a wake-up call about how much we were depending on your generosity." This confession was interesting, but not surprising. I had suspected that my financial support had been integrated into their lifestyle in ways that went beyond emergency assistance. "Michael's been working construction for other people since his business failed, and I'm working full-time now. We're making it, but just barely. It's made us realize how much we took your help for granted." "I'm sorry to hear you're having difficulties," I said, and I meant it. "But I hope you understand why I made the decision to sell the house." "I do understand, and I'm not asking for help or trying to get back into your good graces. I just wanted you to know that we recognize how wrong we were and that we're sorry." "I appreciate that," I replied. "I also wanted to ask about Emma and Jake. They miss you, and they've been asking if they could see you sometime. I know things are complicated between us, but they're old enough now to understand what happened, and they feel bad about how we treated you." This was a more complex request. I had maintained some contact with Emma over the past year, meeting her for lunch occasionally when she could get away from her parents. She was now 17 and mature enough to understand the family dynamics that had led to my decision to sell the house. "I've been seeing Emma occasionally," I said. "She's a lovely young woman, and I enjoy our time together." "What about Jake? He's 15 now, and he's really grown up a lot. He understands that we were wrong to move you to the basement." I considered her request. Jake had been younger when the family crisis occurred, and I wasn't sure how much he truly understood about the situation versus what he had been told by his parents. "I'd be open to seeing Jake," I said carefully, "but it would have to be separate from any relationship with you and Michael. I'm not interested in rebuilding the family dynamic that led to the basement situation." "I understand, and I respect your boundaries. I just thought you should know that the kids love you and remember all the good times you shared." "I love them too," I said honestly. "But loving someone doesn't mean accepting unacceptable treatment from their parents." "You're absolutely right," she said, looking chastened. "We had no right to treat you the way we did, especially in your own house." We parted cordially, but I left the encounter feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe that Jennifer's apologies were genuine and that some form of reconciliation might be possible, but a larger part of me recognized that people often expressed remorse when they were facing consequences for their behavior, only to revert to old patterns once the pressure was removed. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about the encounter and what it might mean for my relationship with my grandchildren. I discussed it with Harold, who had become my trusted confidant and advisor on family matters. "What do you think motivated her to approach you?" he asked. "I think she's dealing with her own difficult family situation with her mother and has gained some perspective on how she treated me. But I also think she's hoping to rebuild some kind of relationship because they're struggling financially." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Harold pointed out. "She might genuinely regret her behavior while also hoping to restore access to your financial support." He was right, and his observation helped me clarify my own feelings about the situation. I was willing to maintain relationships with my grandchildren, but only if they were based on genuine affection rather than their parents' financial needs or guilt. A few weeks later, Jake called me directly, asking if we could meet for lunch. His approach was more mature than I had expected from a 15-year-old. "Grandma, I know things are complicated with Mom and Dad, but I miss you and I want to have a relationship with you that's separate from all that drama." I agreed to meet him, and I was impressed by his maturity and insight. He had clearly thought about the family situation and understood that his parents had treated me unfairly. I was younger when it happened, so I didn't really understand at the time, but now I realize that making you sleep in the basement was really messed up. I'm sorry we didn't stand up for you. You were children. It wasn't your responsibility to manage the adult relationships in the family. Maybe not, but we could have been more grateful for everything you did for us. I understand that now. Our lunch was pleasant and natural, without the underlying tensions that had characterized family gatherings during the crisis period. Jake seemed genuinely interested in my life at Sunset Manor, my relationship with Harold, and my advocacy work. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," he said as we prepared to leave. "It must have been really hard to sell the house, but you did what you had to do." His words meant more to me than any apology from his parents because they came from genuine understanding rather than guilt or self-interest. The encounter with Jennifer and the subsequent meeting with Jake had given me hope that it might be possible to maintain meaningful relationships with my grandchildren while still protecting myself from their parents' financial manipulation and disrespectful treatment. I was willing to explore those relationships, but only on terms that honored the lessons I had learned about my own worth and the importance of mutual respect in family dynamics. The woman who had been moved to her own basement was now setting the terms for any future family relationships, and those terms prioritized her dignity and well-being above all else. 5 years after selling the house and moving to Sunset Manor, I stood in the community center auditorium watching 150 elderly residents and their family members participate in our 5th annual Healthy Family Boundaries Conference. What had started as a small support group in my apartment had grown into a regional program that was helping families across 3 states develop more respectful and sustainable relationships. The conference had become the signature event of the Margaret Wilson Foundation for Elder Dignity, a nonprofit organization I had established with some of the proceeds from my book sales. The foundation provided education, advocacy, and direct assistance to elderly people who were being financially or emotionally abused by their families. 5 years ago, I was sleeping in the basement of my own house because my son and daughter-in-law decided my comfort was less important than their convenience. Today, I'm standing here as proof that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and rebuild your life on your own terms. The audience applause was warm and sustained, but more importantly, I could see recognition and hope in the faces of elderly people who were dealing with similar situations.
Over the past 5 years, I had received thousands of letters from people who had read my book, attended my workshops, or heard my story through media coverage. My book had become a bestseller in the senior market and was being used in social work programs, elder law practices, and family counseling centers across the country. The foundation had helped over 500 elderly people escape abusive family situations and rebuild their lives with dignity and independence. Harold and I had married 3 years earlier in a beautiful ceremony in the Sunset Manor Gardens, surrounded by the community of friends who'd become our chosen family. Our relationship continued to be a source of joy and partnership, built on mutual respect and shared values. "You've created something that will outlast both of us," Harold told me as we watched the conference participants engage in workshops on financial boundaries, housing options, and legal protections. "This movement you started is changing how families think about aging and independence." The conference featured panels of adult children who would learn to respect their parents' autonomy, elderly people who had successfully established boundaries with manipulative family members, and professionals who were implementing new approaches to elder care that prioritize dignity and choice. One panel that particularly moved me featured Emma and Jake, now 20 and 18, talking about how their family's crisis had taught them important lessons about respect and gratitude. "When I was younger, I thought my grandmother was being mean by selling the house," Emma told the audience, "but now I understand that she was teaching us that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, and that family relationships have to be based on mutual respect." Jake added, "My grandmother showed me that elderly people aren't just there to solve other people's problems. They're individuals with their own needs and rights, and they deserve to be treated with dignity." Both of my grandchildren had maintained relationships with me that were separate from their parents' ongoing financial struggles. Emma was now in college on a scholarship she had earned through her own hard work, and Jake was a senior in high school with plans to study social work. "You inspired me to want to help people," Jake told me during a private conversation at the conference. "Seeing how you turned your bad experience into something that helps others made me realize that's the kind of work I want to do." The relationship with Michael and Jennifer had settled into polite but distant contact. They sent holiday cards and occasionally called to check on my health, but the deep family bond that had once existed was gone, replaced by a more formal relationship based on mutual wariness. I had heard that they were doing better financially. Michael had found steady work with a construction company, and Jennifer had been promoted to office manager at the dental practice where she worked. They had moved to a larger apartment and seemed to have achieved some stability. But there had been no real acknowledgement of the extent of their past behavior. no genuine effort to understand how their treatment of me had affected our relationship. They seemed to view the basement incident as a regrettable but understandable response to their financial crisis, rather than a fundamental violation of my dignity and autonomy. I had made peace with the fact that some relationships couldn't be fully repaired, and that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. I could wish them well without welcoming them back into my inner circle. The most meaningful recognition had come from unexpected sources. I had been invited to testify before a congressional committee on elder abuse, sharing my story as part of efforts to strengthen legal protections for elderly people. The testimony had led to new legislation that made it easier for elderly people to recover assets that had been taken by family members. Mrs. Wilson's story illustrates a widespread problem that has been hidden in families for too long, the committee chair had said. Her courage in speaking out has helped us understand the scope of financial abuse by adult children and the need for stronger legal remedies. I had also been featured in a documentary about elder abuse that had aired on national television, reaching millions of viewers with the message that elderly people had rights and options when faced with family manipulation. The financial success of the book and speaking engagements had allowed me to be generous in ways that felt meaningful and sustainable. In addition to the foundation, I had established scholarship funds at 3 universities, donated to organizations that provided legal assistance to elderly people, and funded research on family dynamics and aging. The contrast with my previous financial relationship with Michael's family was stark. Instead of funding entitlement and ingratitude, I was supporting causes and people who used the resources to create positive change and help others. As I looked around the conference that day, I was struck by how much my life had changed since that humiliating morning when I woke up in my own basement and decided that enough was enough. The woman who had been treated like an unwelcome burden was now a respected advocate whose work is helping families across the country. The grandmother who had been moved to the basement to make room for her son's family was now living in a beautiful apartment with a husband who cherished her, surrounded by friends who valued her contributions. Most importantly, I had learned that dignity was not something that could be taken away by others. It was something that could only be surrendered. By refusing to surrender mine, I had not only reclaimed my own life, but it helped thousands of other elderly people reclaim theirs. The circle was complete, but it had led to a place of purpose and influence that I never could have imagined when I was sleeping on that basement cot. The woman who had been made homeless in her own home was creating a movement that was helping other elderly people avoid the same fate. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started.
As I write these final words, 7 years have passed since that Christmas morning when I woke up on a cot in my own basement and decided that enough was enough. I am now 82 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that selling my house and starting over was the most empowering decision I made in the final decades of my life. The Margaret Wilson Foundation for Elder Dignity has now helped over 2,000 elderly people escape abusive family situations and rebuild their lives with independence and respect. Our programs operate in 12 states, and our educational materials are used by social workers, elder law attorneys, and healthcare professionals across the country. My book has been translated into 4 languages and has sold over 100,000 copies worldwide. I receive letters daily from readers who have found the courage to establish boundaries with entitled adult children, to protect their assets from family manipulation, and to prioritize their own dignity and well-being. Harold and I celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary last month, and our relationship continues to be a source of joy, companionship, and mutual support. We have created a life together that honors both our independence and our commitment to each other, proving that love and partnership can flourish at any age when built on the right foundation.
The conference center at Sunset Manor has been renamed the Margaret and Harold Wilson Center for Healthy Aging in recognition of our joint efforts to promote dignity and autonomy for elderly people. The center operates workshops, support groups, and educational programs that help seniors navigate the challenges of aging while maintaining their independence and self-respect. Emma graduated from college last year with a degree in social work and now works for our foundation, helping elderly people who are facing family financial abuse. Jake is a sophomore studying gerontology and plans to become an advocate for seniors' rights. You taught us that family love should enhance people's lives, not control them, Emma told me during our foundation's recent board meeting. That lesson has shaped how we think about all our relationships. Both of my grandchildren have become powerful advocates for elder dignity, speaking at conferences and sharing their perspective as adult children who learn to respect their grandmother's autonomy and independence. The relationship with Michael and Jennifer remains cordial but distant. We exchange holiday greetings and occasional phone calls, but the deep family bond that once existed has been replaced by a more formal relationship based on mutual respect for boundaries. I have heard that they are doing well. Michael has started his own small construction business again, and Jennifer has become a dental practice manager. They seem to have learned to live within their means and have stopped looking to others to solve their financial problems. But there has never been a full acknowledgement of how their treatment of me violated basic principles of respect and dignity. They seem to view the basement incident as an unfortunate but understandable response to their crisis, rather than a fundamental betrayal of family values. I have made peace with this limitation. Some relationships can be repaired, and others can only be managed. The important thing is that I no longer define my worth through their approval or disapproval. To every elderly person who is reading this and recognizing patterns from their own family relationships, I want you to know that you have more power and options than you might realize. You are not obligated to accept disrespectful treatment from anyone, including your own children. Your home is your sanctuary, and no one has the right to make you uncomfortable in your own space. Your financial resources are yours to control, and you are not required to fund other people's lifestyle choices or poor decisions. Your dignity matters. Your comfort in your own home matters. Your right to control your own resources is not subject to family vote. The woman who once slept in her own basement to avoid disappointing her family is now sleeping peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by people who would never ask her to sacrifice her dignity for their convenience. The grandmother who was treated like an unwelcome burden is now a respected advocate whose work ensures that other elderly people will not face the same humiliation and betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that elderly people deserve dignity and respect. And thank you for understanding that love should never require accepting abuse. Now go reclaim your own worth, establish your own boundaries, and create relationships that honor the person you are rather than exploit the resources you possess. You deserve better than a basement in your own home. You deserve better than being taken for granted by people who should treasure you. And it is never too late to demand the respect that should have been yours all along.